This begins the actual installation of a dump kit. In the previous video, as you remember, we determined where all the product was going to be situated on the truck. We'll begin by cutting the chassis off at the appropriate length. After you get that cleaned up, dry fit the hinges, and part of this video shows a temporary spacer, as we mentioned earlier, have to be installed in order to give space for our fuel filler hoses to go in over the top of the frame. So we'll clamp those on, and I must take a second to say that in your kit you're going to notice there are two rear hinge pins. We had the opportunity to use a single extra long hinge pin in this installation since we have the product in our shop. That's what we chose to do. If you have it available, it's quite alright and might add a little bit of strength, but it is not totally necessary to do that. Tack weld everything in position to make sure that we have the proper alignment and the bed's on good and straight when we get it sitting on there before we do final welding. We are going to bolt the front crossmember L brackets behind an existing overload spring bracket. You see here they're pre-drilled to match existing holes. We'll bolt those on with grade 8 1/2-inch bolts and self-locking nuts. Set the scissor assembly on the truck, mark the cross member. We cut the cross member a little extra short to allow for ease of welding when we weld the cross member to the L brackets. As you'll see here, we built a bracket for the scissor assembly to rest on when the bed's in the down position. Do be aware that through the life, the scissor assembly will get lower and lower in the truck if you don't put something there to stop that lowering. The 4-inch channel iron in this video represents the main runner or the sill in the directions underneath the bed. We will slide those up inside the 4-inch channel iron once the bed's installed on the truck. Slide the sill supports out till they contact the channel iron and bolt it there with 2 1/2-inch grade 8 bolts on each side. As you see here, we're modifying the bed guides for a lockdown bracket the customer requested to be installed on this truck. Next, you'll see we're fabricating a cross member to go on top of the frame in front of the scissor assembly. These guides will weld to the end of this cross member and be permanently attached to it. We'll bolt this cross member down to the top frame flange right behind the cab of the truck. We are using existing holes that were already drilled in the truck frame. And this particular case, the heads of the bolts would interfere with the bed when it comes down, and it would actually set on the bolts. We didn't want it to do that, so we countersunk the bolts down inside the cross member, and we had to saw holes in order for our socket to go down inside the cross member. We'll now move underneath the bed, and there's a lot of work to be done on the bed before it's installed on the truck. I must tell you at this point where we set the bed on the truck and do what we call a dry fit. We'll actually set it down on the chassis as close as we can. We want to make sure that if any trimming needs to be done on the rear hinges to clear cross members or rear hitches that happen to be on the bed. In some cases they have to be trimmed quite a bit if you don't have a bed that's a 10-foot bed for a 60-inch cab to axle or a 12-foot bed for an 84-inch cab to axle. You're going to have some clearance problems back there at the back, and don't be afraid to trim the back of those hinges off, and that's more than likely going to be the case when you install it. Mark all the holes for drilling where the sill supports contact the sills. In this particular case, we mark the hole for our front tie-down bracket should you choose to put that on your truck. And it's a lot easier to take care of all that before the bed's installed on the truck. So you'll see a lot of drilling and cutting going on in these videos before it's installed. We chose to pre-drill our holes so we didn't have to work underneath the truck bed in a raised position. We reached inside the frame with a paint marker, marked the hole locations, and those are pre-drills. We may have to ream them slightly once it's installed on the truck. We also marked interference locations with the cross members of the bed. If you'll take a look here closely, You can see we had to trim 2 cross members to allow room for the scissor assembly when the bed's in its full down position. Sometimes you can get by with cutting 1 cross member, but most of the time it's necessary to trim 2. And now you get to the fun part, the final assembly. If you've done all your measurements correctly and marked all the holes correctly, the bed should set right down on all 4 corners. When you get it set on the truck, make sure that it is contacting all 4 corners. Both hinges on the back are up against the seal of the bed, good and flat. Make sure your bed's in proper alignment front to rear. You don't want it to be fastened onto the truck at an angle, but this shouldn't be possible at this point at the front because your guides are in place. Your rear hinges should be in place. Once it's welded on the back and bolted at the front, everything should work properly. Raise it up for proper operation. Make sure you don't fill that tank when the bed's in its up position. And as we've mentioned before, as the bed goes up, the oil level in the tank goes down. This is a single acting system. So anytime you fill that tank, the bed must be in its lowered position. Like to be able to get the unit back off at some point in time if it needs to be serviced or repaired in the future life of the unit. So in this particular case, you'll be able to unbolt the L brackets from the frame. We'll also be able to take the bolts out where the scissor assembly attaches to the bed seals, and we'll also be able to remove the rear hinge pins so the bed can be lifted off of the truck. Thank you very much for doing business with Pierce Sales, and if you have any questions, give us a call here, 1-800-658-6301.